When white plays e4, if black wants to provoke a complicated fight, then the Sicilian defense, c5, is a good choice. One of the sharpest and most aggressive attacking lines in the Sicilian is the dragon variation. We reach this fire-breathing opening after the moves e4, taking space in the center and preparing to grab more space with d4. Black can discourage this idea by playing the solid e5, or imbalance the game immediately with c5. Controlling d4, which we'll see is the beginning of the dark-squared control so typical in the dragon variation. White continues to develop and centralizes a knight with knight f3. White is now ready to open up the game with d4. Black continues to control the dark squares with d6, controlling the e5 square and liberating the light-squared bishop. If white is also in the mood for a complicated fight, then the game turns into the open Sicilian with d4. White opens the center and prepares further development. Black certainly doesn't want white to comfortably keep two pawns in the center, so black plays c takes d4, trading a flank or non-center pawn for white's central d-pawn. This opens up lines on the c-file for black, which we'll see is an important file to generate counterplay. This capture also opens up the d-file for white's pieces to enjoy. White typically recaptures the pawn with knight takes d4, regaining material and centralizing the knight to an active square. Black continues to develop and counterattacks white's center with knight f6, when white develops a piece and reinforces the center with knight c3. We now reach the dragon Sicilian after the key move, g6. Black's dark-squared bishop is ready to develop to g7, where it places serious pressure down the long diagonal. White's most common response is bishop e3. Black should continue with the plan of playing bishop g7, because if black plays knight g4, on the surface this looks like a reasonable move, harassing white's well-placed dark-squared bishop. Unfortunately for black, this move is refuted by bishop b5 check. Knight c6 loses material to knight takes c6, and knight d7 blocks black's light-squared bishop, allowing white to win a piece with queen takes g4. But it looks like black is holding things together with bishop d7, defending against check, but also pinning this bishop to black's king. This allows white to win a piece with queen takes g4, taking advantage of the pinned bishop on d7. We continue our journey in the dragon with the essential move, bishop g7. Black's dragon bishop breathes fire down the long diagonal and prepares kingside castling. White can now reinforce the center with f3. The f-pawn supports e4 and also prepares a future g4 advance, starting a dangerous kingside pawn storm. After playing f3, white's king looks vulnerable on the e1 to h4 diagonal, but it won't stay there for long. White is preparing to castle queenside when we enter some of the sharpest lines in the dragon. Black now takes the opportunity to castle the king, securing the king for the time being, at least before the mutual attacks begin with opposite side castling. White now creates a strong queen-bishop battery on the dark squares with queen d2, preparing to castle the king, as well as supporting the idea of bishop h6, trying to eliminate black's key defender of the kingside. Black continues to develop and add pressure against the d4 square with knight c6. We have now reached a critical moment in white's setup known as the Yugoslav attack. White can castle the king immediately, or first develop the light-squared bishop with bishop c4. White's bishop develops to an active diagonal, pointing directly at the enemy king. We'll see how this bishop is both an attacking piece and a key defender of the king once white castles queenside. A typical plan for black is to play bishop d7, developing the bishop and clearing the path for a rook to use the c8 square. White continues by castling queenside, securing the king and bringing the rook into the action. White is now ready to launch a kingside pawn storm, so black needs to create counterplay on the queenside as quickly as possible. Black can achieve this aim by playing rook c8, preparing to target white's unprotected bishop on c4, as well as aligning with white's king. Before white launches a kingside attack, the unprotected light-squared bishop is secured with bishop b3. Anticipating black's next move, knight e5, preparing to land on c4, forking the queen and dark-squared bishop. White initiates the kingside pawn storm characteristic of the Yugoslav attack with h4. White benefits from the black pawn on g6, allowing white to open up the h-file and create a dangerous attack. We have once again reached a crossroads. Black can slow down white's attack with h5, a key move preventing white's plan of a quick h5, making it harder for white to open a file against the black king. Both sides will enjoy attacking chances in this sharp position. Instead of playing the more solid h5, a dragon player can accept more risk and continue with the plan to counterattack white's king with knight c4, forking the queen and dark-squared bishop. Black would love to eliminate white's dark-squared bishop, so the dragon bishop on g7 can rule the dark squares. But white does not allow this exchange by playing bishop takes c4. When after rook takes c4, black has removed one of white's best attackers, as well as defender of the king, the light-squared bishop. White can consider sacrificing the pawn immediately with h5, creating incredible complications. Or white can first prepare this move with g4, supporting h5 on the next move. We can see the ideas of both sides come to life with queen a5. Black begins to counterattack on the queen side with this typical move, adding pressure against both the knight on c3 as well as the a2 pawn. Now that the queen is developed, black is ready to bring the last major piece into the attack with rook f to c8. White can continue the kingside assault with h5, preparing to open up the h-file with h takes g6. Black's last piece can enter the action with rook f to c8. The battle lines have been drawn. White is going to open up the h-file with h takes g6 and prepare to attack the enemy king on that file. White will often play bishop h6, trying to exchange black's dark-squared bishop, which is both an excellent attacking piece and key defender of black's king. Black, on the other hand, will continue to attack on the queen side, including ideas such as b5 and b4, attacking the knight on c3. Sometimes black does not have enough time to play b5 and b4, so black will often consider the exchange sacrifice rook takes c3, damaging white's structure and preparing to attack the enemy king. This is one of many razor-sharp positions you can expect when playing the dragon. In the Yugoslav attack, instead of playing bishop c4, white can also consider castling the king immediately. By not immediately playing bishop c4, black can no longer gain a tempo with knight e5, which makes it more difficult to achieve knight c4. White hopes to use the time saved to continue with the typical g4, h4, and h5 pawn storm. The drawback of not playing bishop c4 immediately is the d5 square isn't as well protected, so black can play the instructive pawn break d5, immediately fighting back in the center. White's main response is e takes d5, but it's also important to know how to handle knight takes c6, forcing b takes c6. By exchanging knights, white can try to invade black's territory with e5. This may look a bit scary, but black is doing just fine after the calm retreat, knight e8. Black's knight moves to safety, revealing the dark-squared bishop's attack against the e5 pawn. Notice the knight can enter the game with knight c7, with the possible idea of knight e6 in the future. After white supports the fragile e5 pawn with f4, black has no shortage of good responses, including exploiting the open b-file with rook b8, activating the queen with the typical queen a5 idea, or even contesting the center and preparing to blast open the dark squares with f6. Since black enjoys great potential in this position, white typically avoids this line. Since playing knight takes c6 immediately does not impress, white relieves the tension in the center by first playing e takes d5. When after knight takes d5, recapturing the pawn and awakening the dragon bishop on g7, white typically exchanges knights with knight takes c6, b takes c6. White should not try to win material with knight takes d5, c takes d5, and queen takes d5. White has won a pawn, but in so doing, has opened more lines against the white king. Black can emphasize this point by playing queen c7, avoiding a trade of queens, and offering the rook on a8. The point is that after queen takes a8, attracting the queen to the 8th rank, which allows the double attack, bishop f5, threatening checkmate on c2, as well as revealing an attack against white's queen. White accepts 2 rooks for the queen with queen takes f8 check, king takes f8. Objectively, white should be able to hold the balance in this position, but practically needs to be concerned about tactics and general pressure against the king. Instead of trying to win material, a more solid approach for white is to play bishop d4. Aiming to take advantage of the slightly better pawn structure, it offers to exchange black's important dark-squared bishop. As always, black must play actively, and the game remains complicated after e5, taking space in the center and attacking white's bishop. e5 does weaken the dark squares, allowing bishop c5, attacking black's rook. Black can play rook e8, or else offer an exchange sacrifice with bishop e6. White should avoid accepting the exchange sacrifice and instead gain greater control of the dark squares with knight e4. If white accepts the sacrifice with bishop takes f8, after queen takes f8, black will soon play rook b8 with a strong attack. If white is not interested in fighting the dragon with the razor-sharp Yugoslav attack, starting with bishop e3, then white may prefer a more modest development plan, starting with bishop e2. Black can continue with the natural bishop g7. Instead of castling on opposite wings, both sides can castle kingside. Black's dark-squared bishop enjoys X-ray pressure against the knight on d4, which can become a serious issue once black's knight on f6 clears the long diagonal. White can centralize the dark-squared bishop and reinforce the knight with bishop e3. Black continues to add pressure against the center with knight c6. One typical idea for white is to play for a quick f4, grabbing more space in the center. A good way to prepare this plan is to play knight b3. The point is, if white plays f4 immediately, this looks like a strong position for white, but notice the dark-squared bishop on e3 is no longer protected. This allows black to play queen b6, attacking the unprotected b2 pawn and adding pressure against the knight on d4. Black is now threatening the discovered attack knight takes e4, revealing the dark-squared bishop's pressure against the knight on d4. Another interesting discovered attack with the knight is knight g4, attacking white's dark-squared bishop and revealing black's dark-squared bishop's attack against d4. This allows black active play that white does not have to allow. Instead of playing f4 immediately, white can play knight b3. White's knight vacates the d4 square where it was under pressure and also reveals the dark-squared bishop's pressure against black's queenside. The main point is that after black continues to develop actively with bishop e6, white can now play f4, taking space in the center with aggressive ideas such as f5 in mind, when black no longer has the counterattacking resource queen b6 available. At this point, black has several interesting options. One option is to play queen c8, discouraging white's idea of f5, as well as preparing the possibility of bishop g4, preparing to trade the light-squared bishops. Instead of playing queen c8, another idea is to target the c4 square with knight a5, with the idea of meeting f5 with bishop c4. Although not as fast-paced as the main lines of the dragon, this is still a reasonable way to play for white, when plenty of action can still be expected. The dragon's Sicilian is an aggressive opening filled with exciting tactics and attacking chances for both sides. If you don't mind taking risks, not afraid to compromise your king's safety in order to aggressively attack your opponent, then the fire-breathing dragon variation may become your favorite response against the open Sicilian.